Hello, and welcome to Continual, the never-ending convention. Today, we've got a special edition of the Continual Writers Track, the Brave New Worlds of Zombies Need Brains. My name's Jeean Marie Ward, and I will be your host on this exploration of this wonderful small press. With me today are its editors and publishers, Patricia Bray, David Coe, S.C. Butler, and publisher Joshua Palmatier. Welcome, everyone. Could you do a little introduction of yourselves so that the folks out in video land know who you are before we start this? Patricia, I'm going to lead off with you.
Thanks, Jean Marie. I'm excited to have this opportunity to chat with folks. It's missing conventions has been a big part of the 2020, and it's really appreciate this opportunity. I'm a writer. I've published Regency romances. Back was how I broke into writing. I've published epic fantasy with Random House, The Bantam, and I was there when the first idea for an anthology happened with Joshua Palmatier, and so I've been editing anthologies with him for about 10 years now, if we do the math. So, and it's been a lot of fun.
Sam?
Hi, I'm S.C. Butler, also known as Sam Butler. I'm primarily a fantasy author. I published a trilogy with Tor Books many, many years ago. I think the last volume came out in 2009. And I've sold some short stories and some other things since, and have been keeping busy as an editor with Josh's imprint at Zombies Need Brains, in addition to having a few stories. I think I might have had a story in the first one 10 years ago. At the moment, I am in the process. I got the rights back for my books from Tor, and I'm sort of languorously putting together a website and getting ready to put the books out on my own. So that's what I've been doing.
David?
Hi, my name is David Coe. I also write as B.B. Jackson, and under those two names, I've published 24 novels and about as many short stories. I was also in that original Zombies Need Brains. Wasn't Urbar? Was that the first one?
Urbar.
Yep.
Yeah. The after hours. So I think we're all veterans of that. And I started editing with Zombies Need Brains a couple of years ago. Hopefully this year we'll be doing my third co-editing stint with Joshua.
Yep. And the man himself, Joshua Palmatier.
Hello, everybody. I am an epic fantasy author with Daw Books. I have 9 novels out, and we'll hopefully be signing for 3 more of them here in the next couple of weeks. But for this panel, more importantly, I am the founder of Zombies Need Brains. Started it up more or less with Patricia's help ages ago, and have been doing the Kickstarters and fundraising for it since.
What made you decide to start a small press? It's a scary thing to embark on.
Yeah, it took me a couple of years to convince myself to do it. Basically, the first anthology, the After Hours Urbar anthology that they mentioned earlier, that was actually put out through Daw Books. The first 2 anthologies that Patricia Bray and I edited came out through Daw Books. And then there's a little shakeup in the publishing industry at that point, and one of the consequences was that Daw Books cut down their anthology line. They were doing like 8 anthologies a year or something like that, and they cut it down to like 1 or 2. So our editing stint with Daw kind of ended at that point. Waited a couple of years, and during those years I kind of threw around this idea of starting my own small press and to do the anthologies. And eventually when I realized that the anthology line at Daw was not going to come back, I took the plunge and said, okay, let's set up Zombies and figure out how to get it funded and all of that point. So we got into it, we got our feet wet, and then I just dove in.
And with the aided and abetted by Patricia Bray, how did you get sucked into all this?
Well, I was there when we were at a con we were at a bar. There might have been a drink or two taken. I mean, when the
don't
idea
believe it.
for the original, After Hours Tale from the Bar came. And then Josh and I had done the first 2 anthologies. The second was Modern Fae, which we had done. And Josh was like, I really want to do this. I want to do a small press. I'm like, that's a lot to take on. That's an enormous amount. And I'm like, Josh, you have this small thing. You have a full-time job. You're also writing, starting a small press. You teach spinning at the gym. It seems like, I don't know if there's enough hours in the day, but Josh did what he did best. And he said, I believe in myself and I can do this. And he took it on and he launched Zombies Needs Brains. And so I give him all the credit in the world for saying, hey, I can do this. I can figure out how to get this done step by step by step. And I've been happy to come along for the ride as being a co-editor on several of these projects, including a couple you can see in my virtual background behind me. But
yes. I'm rather fond of Ware myself, but that a little self-interest involved there. David, how did you get sucked into being an editor? I mean, I can understand why you'd want to write for these people. They give wonderful editorial letters and they pay money, but editing.
There's this old dictum in rock and roll that every guitar player in rock and roll secretly wants to be a drummer, and every drummer in rock and roll secretly wants to be a lead guitar player. And I believe that every writer wants to be an editor, and every editor secretly wants to be a writer. And I've wanted to edit for a long time. I first met Patricia and Joshua at an Albacon, I think, years and years and years ago. And I remember a lot of drinking and a lot of laughing. And they were kind enough to invite me into several of the early anthologies. I was in After Hours and Weir and Temporally Out of Order. And there might have been another one in there. And then Joshua and I both had the same idea for a follow-up anthology called Temporarily Deactivated, after we both got the same phishing email about our alleged bank accounts being temporarily deactivated. And we got in touch and I was like, we need to do a kind of a sequel to that one. And Joshua said, I had the same phishing email last week. I had the same idea. Do you want to co-edit with me? And I was eager to do it. I jumped at the opportunity. It's been great. I've learned so much working with Joshua.
Learned as a writer by being an editor?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think anytime you're edited by good editors, and all three of these people I'm on with today are marvelous editors, but anytime you work with a good editor, you learn something as a writer. But I was talking about Joshua taking me under his wing and teaching me how to be an editor, and he has taught me a lot, and I'm really grateful to him.
Cool. Sam, how did you get sucked into this project?
Well, mine was pretty easy. I think I had a story in each of the first 3 or 4 anthologies, and then lo and behold, Josh and Patricia turned down my 5th one, and I was aghast and terribly disappointed. And I figured the only way I could get back into their good graces and maybe get another story in again was if I did some of the grunt work. So I told Josh, you ever need an extra editor, I'd be happy to be obliged. He knew me from actually, I guess we didn't know each other from OWW, but a bunch of us had been with OWW, which is the Online Writers Workshop. And as anybody who's done a lot of workshopping knows, the best way to learn about your writing in a workshop is to edit other people's writing. The best way to improve is to, edit other people's writing and then say, wait, I'm telling this person not to do this. I can't do it myself either. And so I thought, let's see if I can take what I learned at OWW and apply it to Zombies Need Brains. And then maybe I'll learn something and start writing well enough to have Josh get me another anthology as a writer. So that was how I did it.
And you keep doing it. All of you are repeat offenders. Well, I don't know what to say. But one thing does puzzle me, and it's been bothering me for years. Where the heck did the name Zombies Need Brains come from?
There was a party. So we actually, for a while in the early 2000s, there was a group of writers and we did joint promotions together. And we threw a party at the World Fantasy Con in Saratoga, the first one. What year was that?
No idea.
2008. It was before
7 or
2008,
8.
2009, and we couldn't think of a theme. You know, we had paranormal writers there, we had epic fantasy writers, we had a whole bunch of different writers, and so we just named it Zombies Need Brains because it was around Halloween, and then the name just stuck. I mean, as a group of people, you know, and I think it was probably some Josh. I mean, you'll remember who was there when we had the original idea. I think it was some of those same authors that we used to travel to conventions together on the East Coast and do that. I think we had some of the zombies there, you know. So
yeah, I was going to say that when I was trying to come up with the name for the small press, I was like, I wanted to basically scream science fiction fantasy, but at the same time, I wanted it to have this connotation of being fun, you know. And I just kept coming back to Zombies Need Brains. I was like, that just felt perfect to me to hit both of those marks for this title of press.
And the writers being the zombies, and God knows we all need brains.
Yes, we do.
and, I mean, for years we tried to eat each other's brains at conventions, you know.
Yeah.
I thought we were successful a few times.
We were.
Alcohol was undoubtedly involved.
I've never been the same since that Albicon.
Yes, yes. Well, you know, especially in a group that can trace their origin story back to an anthology named Urbar, you know. So we're, you know, the first bard, manned or staffed by Gilgamesh and a host of other interesting creatures over the years. Okay, every year you come up with 1 or 2 and now 3 anthologies that you fund through a crowdsourcing campaign on Kickstarter. And this year you have 3 new anthology themes. I happen to know one is the Modern Deities Guide to Surviving Humanity, sort of a counterpoint to your second DAW anthology, the Modern Phase Guide to Surviving Humanity. I believe there's another one called Derelict. And the third one is, help me out here.
When Worlds Collide.
Worlds Collide. How did you choose these 3 themes? And what is your process for selecting themes in the absence of phishing emails? But, you know, what is the general process for coming up with your themes? Is it a collaborative effort for all the editors? How does it happen? And how did you choose these themes?
It come from multiple sources. There's not like one answer for that. A lot of the themes are just things that I've kind of run into and I've thought, oh, that would be, you know, a good idea. Like the temporally out of order one, I was sitting at an airport and there was a sign on one of the payphones, if anybody remembers those. It said, temporally out of order on the payphone. I was like, well, obviously it's a typo, but at the same time, I sat there for a couple hours. I kept going back to it and, you know, what if, and ended up getting the idea for temporally out of order from that. But often it's just something I've run into or something that pops into my head, like Apocalyptic that we did last year. That one, I just love apocalypse stories, so I wanted to do one like that. Occasionally, though, it's somebody comes up to me at a convention or whatever, and they say, you know, I had this idea for an anthology, the Edge military science fiction fantasy anthology we did with Troy Booker. He basically came up and said, I mean, he's a friend of mine, and we were just sitting at the bar. And and he said, you know, I had this idea for an anthology, and thought it was a good idea, and I added it to my list. Stephen Silver did the same thing with the alternate peace anthology. He said, I had this idea. So whenever anybody does that, I basically add that to a list. I have a file, and it probably has 30 potential anthology idea themes on it. And so I have this nice list, and when I finish up with one charter from the year before, which usually happens right around April, I decide to look at my list and say, well, what do I feel like doing next year? And I usually pick something. I pick something that really excites me as kind of like the main idea, the main theme, and then I pick the other themes around that main theme. And one of the things I try to do is I try to have one that's kind of like more science fiction in it, and then I try to pick one that's a little more fantasy oriented, and then occasionally I'll do one that's a little more urban fantasy. The third one is kind of the niche one that I play with. Like one year it's urban fantasy, next year it's alternate history, next year it's sword and sorcery, that kind of thing. But I'm trying to get a variety of ways that the themes can go. And mostly that's a marketing decision. I want, to bring in as many people to the Kickstarter as I possibly can. So, I don't want to target just science fiction or just fantasy. So a little bit of marketing going into that as well. But I have to feel like the themes kind of pair up well with each other in order to choose them. And then after that, I get people and say, who wants to edit this with me?
So the editors, David and Patricia and Sam, did not come up with these ideas. You're basically going, come little boy, little girl. I have anthology instead of candy. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yep.
Sometimes,
Yeah. But I would have to say that the modern deity one was joint between me and Patricia, because we did modern fae, and I think it was Patricia that came up with the modern fae idea, actually. And then once that one was coming out, we were like, oh, what else could we do this? And we came up with a modern deity idea at that point. So that one's been sitting around as a potential idea for probably 10, 12 years, something like that. So yeah, but the other two, derelict I think was pretty much my idea, and I think When Worlds Collide was my idea.
Okay, so what made David and Sam, what made you guys sign up for your respective anthologies this year?
David had the choice. David had first choice.
That's not true. I sent out an email and I said, these are the ideas. I said, are you interested in any of them? And basically everybody said, well, Patricia was obviously, lined up for modern deity, but for the other two, I let them kind of hash it out amongst themselves. But they both pretty much said, I'll do anything.
Always dangerous. Always dangerous. That's sort of like volunteering,
Josh was utterly surprised that I was coming back for more, because when we did Apocalyptic last year, what was it, Josh? 875 submissions in 90 days.
Yeah, gosh. It was an insane amount of submissions.
It was
for,
a lot
for
of
zombies.
Yeah.
But that's still, that was 10 stories a day for 3 months.
Yeah, we had 400 and some odd for Galactic Stew, and that felt like a lot. I can't imagine doubling that.
Yeah, Sam, you and I had, when we did Portals, that was just,
Portals had been the record before that with like 500 and something, and then we just almost doubled it.
One of the interesting things is initially it was always Josh and guest star, like co-editor. And then, but there have been projects where, like Sam and I have edited together and Josh hasn't, and Josh is like, how are your stories coming? I'm reading some of your slush pile, but of course you and Sam get to make all the decisions.
Well, I knew you guys were going to get too many for me to read them all that year. I was just like, I got 150 of them read, and then I got overwhelmed with the other two anthologies, and I was like, okay.
Yeah. Well, from what I understand from magazine editors, there has been at least a 30% increase in submissions across the board. So get ready.
In the last 6 months?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
great.
get ready, folks. You all
People way too
have,
much time on their hands.
yeah. You all have a rather interesting way of funding these anthologies, and you've made it work for close to 10 years now, which is you run a Kickstarter campaign. And every Kickstarter campaign is the same, but a little bit different. So what can folks expect from the Kickstarter campaign that will be used to fund Derelict, When Worlds Collide, and the Modern Deities Guide to Surviving Humanity?
Well, it's pretty much the same as all of the previous Kickstarters, or at least the last 8 years of Kickstarters or something like that. So, you know, it's, I think of it as you're pre-ordering the anthology. So if you're interested, you can pre-order 1, 2, or 3 of the anthologies. You're basically paying the same price that you're going to pay if we just put it out normally. In fact, you get a discount, a little bit of a discount, if you are going in for all 3. So you get a little bit cheaper than the regular price after the Kickstarter if you go in for all 3. But it has the standard format. You can choose just the anthologies. Then we have a whole bunch of special rewards level after that, or special pledges after that, where you can get things like signed books by certain authors. We have a couple swag bags this year, mostly with Faith Hunter. We have some Zombies Need Brains merchandise kind of levels, where you can get like a baseball cap or you know, an art print. Okay, one of the nice things that I like about working with the artist that does all of our covers, Justin Adams of Aria Studios, is that he allows us to do art prints and sell the art prints. So you can get all of our cover if you want. This year, though, oh, and then we have Tuckerizations. That's where you can get your name inserted into one of the stories, an author's stories. That one's, of course, done by the author. They have to agree to that. So some of the new things that we have this year, though, so it has the same standard format, you know, pick a pledge, you know, and then if we reach our funding goal, then we try to stretch beyond that, of course. But if we reach the funding goal, then, of course, we're going to put out the anthologies. But some of our new levels that we have this year, the first new level is a face mask to go along with the times. So you can get a face mask with the ZNB logo on it. If we get funded, of course, we're going to do the sort of horizontal ZNB logo on the face masks, like we have on the baseball cap. So we have that. We have that as new. One of our levels is also stuffed animal level. All of my editors get to choose a little avatar, so to speak. Yep, David has the great horned owl. And so we had a new editor last year, Crystal Sirakis, edited My Battery is Low and It Is Getting Dark with me. So she got to pick a new a stuffed animal to be her avatar, and she chose an octopus. Now, most of our stuffed animals are tiny, and then they have a little Zombies Need Brains bandana on them.
Right.
This was supposed to be 6 inches tall, according to the website. I should have known something was up when they didn't give me the option of doing the little kerchief. But I ordered them, and obviously this is not 6 inches tall. But the new avatar this year, new stuffed animal, is this little octopus. I'm going to find a different octopus that's smaller once these go out. So if you want this one, you better grab it fast in this Kickstarter.
Collector's item, huh?
Yes, that will probably be a collector's item. Then we introduced this last year, sort of at the last minute for the Kickstarter. I did little enamel pins with the Zombies Need Brains logo. So that's kind of new this year. And this doesn't happen often, but one of our anchor authors, Jack Campbell, offered up a Tuckerization in one of his Lost Fleet series books, which is like probably his most popular series. So we have a Tuckerization in one of his books being offered up this year. It's a little bit higher level than anything else because it's actually in a novel, not just a short story. But those are the new things that we have going on. We do have some new anchor authors this year, which is always exciting to bring new people in the fold. We have Kate Elliott.
I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
I was just going to say that quite apart from the premiums, this year's group of authors is really quite awesome. We have an incredible group of authors this year.
Yes, I think so. I'm very happy. Like Jack Campbell. We got Kate Elliott. She's going to write something along with her son this year. We have Alan Smale, who's I think I'm saying his last name right, Smale. He's done a bunch of alternate history kind of things, so I'll be interested to see if he turns up for his anthology this year. And then we have like Alma Alexander and Alex Bledsoe and Austin Habershaw. We have Stephen Harper as a new anchor this year. He's actually been in a couple of the past anthologies, but he always got in through the slush pile, so to speak. But this year we made him an anchor, so I think he's pretty excited about that.
So obviously the slush pile is a route to the anchor author status, and which gets us into the part which I suspect that most of the people viewing are really interested in, the anthologies themselves. Now, and what can they do to increase their chances in the slush pile? So I'm going to ask the editors to give me their vision of what their particular anthology, what are they hoping to get out of their anthology? What do they want it to look like at this point, with the understanding that things change as you read the stories that you get? So, Sam, why don't you lead it off this time?
Okay. Josh and I will be working on When Worlds Collide. I think there are a few, I should say first off, one of the things I like best about Zombies Need Brains, and as an editor for these, is one of Josh's core concepts. He wants to have new authors, take new authors who are not known for every one of these anthologies, and they're usually about half of the stories. Sometimes a little less, sometimes a little more, depending on what the anchor authors are interested in. And I think it's a really wonderful idea that I would love to see more people in the industry emulating, because I think you always need new blood. You always need new blood. And Josh is somebody with ZNB that's really doing this, and I think it's a terrific thing. I think it's one of the reasons we've had as much success as we have. That said, there are a few things I always like to see, and I think Josh as well, is we like to see, even though we have some anthologies that are probably going to be more science fiction and some that are going to be more fantasy or whatever, we like to see a real spread of stories. I like to say, we'll print something from any genre. If somebody comes in with a When Worlds Collide romance story that we think is really good, we'll print it. Because that's what we're looking for. We're looking for as wide a selection as possible. So, if you've got something that you think will work, but you don't know if it quite fit or not, try it. You might, you might be pleasantly surprised. We would be pleasantly surprised. And I think that's the key for me, is let's see all those different stories. And I hate to confess this to anchor authors, but invariably, my top two stories are not anchor. My favorite thing, whatever I'm doing, it's not an anchor author story. It's some new concept that somebody's brought in that's completely off the wall, and really cool, and really fun. Because that's probably, as Josh has also said, fun is paramount. These stories are designed to be fun.
Patricia, what are you looking to see in terms of the deities here?
So, and like to Sam's point, with deities, a wide variety of stories. I mean, it can be funny, it can be horror, it can be a mystery, it can be a caper. I mean, you know, we deliberately choose a wide range of stories, so we try to have something that appeals to everyone in the book. I'm also looking for something unusual. You know, we have with the anchor authors, to make sure we didn't get 10 stories about Zeus, we asked our anchors to sign up ahead of time. We said, well, you know, this is modern deities, but we don't need 10 stories about Zeus in here. So they signed up and picked authors. You know, the author said, I want this god, I want this religion. We're like, okay, but we're looking for something interesting. You know, I don't want, you know, 10 stories. You know, right now, Eurocentric is what we have, some of the things that have come in. So people who, you know, go beyond, you know, like the list of Roman, you know, gods that you saw in second grade or third grade when you got the social studies project. You know, think of something new or unusual, your own twist. And then my other piece of advice for people submitting is, we will take multiple submissions, and we have had authors, you know, part of the problem of the 800 or 500 is we have had people who've sent in 3 or 4 stories for an anthology. But invariably, when we read those, we'll say, you know, they were close, but if they put that effort into one story and sent us the best possible story for the project, that might have come in. You know, send us your best story. Don't send us 3 stories that are somewhat adequate, hoping that one of them is going to hit, you know, and say, send us your best work. And that's what we really want to see.
David, what's your vision for Derelict?
Well, I would first endorse everything that Sam and Patricia have already said about originality, about really putting the effort into one story and making it work, about a broad range. As with the anthology Joshua and I did last year, which was Galactic Stew, in which we were writing, we wanted people to be writing about food, not using food as a prop in a story about something else, but really making the food central to what was happening in the story. And I think in terms of Derelict, what we have in mind are ships or vessels of one sort or another, be they old spaceships or old sailing ships in a fantasy setting or a historical setting, or even I could envision like an old school bus or an old car or something. But these old vehicles of some sort or another that become central to a story, that aren't just props, aren't just kind of settings in passing, but really play a role in everything that the characters and the plot are revolving around. And again, originality is all. We're going to get lots of derelict spaceships or haunted sailing ships or something like that. As when Joshua and I were on a panel together last fall, one of the things he said was, your first idea might not be your best idea. The first thing that comes to you might be the most obvious, but it might not be the most effective. And so I would urge people to really think and challenge themselves to come up with something that's outside of their comfort zone, that's outside of the kind of normal set of tropes we see in anthologies of this sort.
Cool. Okay, Joshua, globally, and then we'll get back to everybody else. Are there specific things, you know, very specific things that you're looking for, still general, or are there specific things that people who want to write for you should avoid?
Well, let me tackle the avoid thing first, because I saw this a lot last year. Last year we had 3 themes. We had apocalyptic, so apocalypses. We had galactic stew, so food, and had my battery is low and it is getting dark, which is about old tech finding new life. What I saw a lot, especially with galactic stew and with apocalyptic, somebody was trying to write a story that met all 3 themes. That's not the point of writing or producing 3 themes. Okay, so my suggestion, instead of trying to come up with a cool idea that somehow melds all 3 themes into one story, my suggestion is pick one of the themes and focus on one theme. I mean, I can't say that, you know, none of those stories that melded themes, you know, all got ditched. That wasn't true. We ended up accepting a couple of the stories that actually met 2 of the themes. In fact, one of the stories in Apocalyptic was originally submitted for one of the other themes, And when we were looking for that final story, I said to Sam, you know, what about this? And we ended up putting that in, and from one theme to the other theme with that story. So, you know, yes, maybe it has a slight advantage, but I don't think the advantage is focusing your energy on trying to combine themes. Yeah, so I would just focus in on one particular theme. The suggestion for what we're looking for, what not to avoid, is we see a lot of stories submitted where it's just an idea. And what we're going to accept is a cool idea, yes, but you go beyond that. You have to create a really good character story around that idea, and a really good plot around that idea. And it has to be a story where, like David was mentioning earlier with the Galactic Stew, it has to be a story essentially where if you take the theme out of the story has to collapse. The theme has to be central to the story. So for Galactic Stew, if we take the food out of the story and the story held up, it was like, well, this isn't really a story about food. This is a story about something else, and food just happens to be there. We're not going to accept those types of stories. If we can take the theme element out of the story and it falls apart, then it's not good enough. But really, honestly, the main thing we end up seeing that we have to end up rejecting is this really cool idea, but you don't do anything with it. So really, you know, get that cool idea to start with, of course, because that's going to drive your writing. But then you got to sit back and say, okay, who's the character that's going to be affected by this idea? How is their character arc going to work? You know, how are they going to change from beginning to end, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not stealing everybody else's thoughts here, but the other thing I would say is to, how do I want to say it? Don't get locked into, I guess Sam kind of brushed by this earlier, don't get locked into a specific genre. Like Derelict, obviously everybody's going to think, you know, horror, right? It's very open to a horror idea, ghost story or whatever. But like everybody has mentioned, we want a variety of stories in all of these anthologies. So yes, we're going to have probably a horror story or two in there, but we're also looking for, you know, that humorous story or that, you know, melodramatic story, or that, like Sam mentioned earlier, maybe a romance. I mean, it's all still got to have the theme, revolve around the theme, and it's all still got to be like science fiction, fantasy oriented. It can't be pure romance. But we want that. We want the lighthearted. We want the dark. We want everything in between. So even though the theme lends itself to horror or lends itself to science fiction, you know, try to take it out of that box. Try to give it a different kind of flavor. And then we're probably going to be more interested, because if 300 stories, I can almost guarantee for Derelict that, you know, we're going to get 600 horror stories. You know, we can't take 600 horror stories. So.
Okay. Cool. Sam, you've had your hand up. Unfortunately, I can't really see the way I could in a live panel, but yeah, you've had your hand up, so go forward.
No, I was just going to say to Josh's point about, I remember this distinctly from Apocalyptic last year. There was a story that Josh and I just loved the idea of. It was, we both commented on, wow, this is, and it was funny, because we never get enough funny stories. We should probably say that. We never get enough funny stories. It was funny, it was perfect, it was everything. But it was 2,500 words long. There was no plot and there was no character. I mean, it was a genius idea, but the writer had not actually created a story. And that, I think that's, you can't emphasize that enough.
Is word count an issue?
Yes. I
mean, I know that, you know, I know from bitter experience, yes, I write long, that 7,500 words can be really hard to get your story in. everything in under 7,500 words. Get the idea, get the plot, get the character arc, get the humor, all of these. Get some description because you're in Ming China, for crying out loud. But is there a story that's too small?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
So, yeah, I was going to say, that was one of the tips I was going to say for Don't Send Us. I mean, we get 500-word stories, and there are very few authors who can pull off a story in 500 words. We get 20,000 words, and we're like, we don't have 20,000, words worth of room. I mean, Josh will give a guideline, say, here's the rough guideline, and you've got to be roughly within those lanes. You could have a beautifully polished 40,000-word novella that we can't take. And frankly, Sam, David, and Josh and I aren't going to read a 40,000-word novella because we'll know you've missed the mark in there. But yeah, I mean, there is, yeah. And, generally we'll work with people. If they send us a 9,000-word story, we'll say we really needs to be 7,500. We'll help you identify where it can be trimmed. But you need to be in the ballpark. You can't be, to totally abuse sports metaphors. You have to be in the ballpark. If you are in the football stadium, you are in the wrong place. You need to be, roughly in the wavelength. So you send us something that's under 1,000 words, it's not going to work. You send us something that's, I mean, we've seen some. I don't know what you got last year, but we've seen really bloated stories like. You want, or we've even seen things that this is great. It's chapter 1 of a novel. It's not a short story. I mean, that's the other thing we see a lot of is this, we love it. It's great. This is not a story. This is chapter 1.
I want to emphasize, because I get, every time we're doing the open call, I get numerous emails where people are like, are you accepting flash fiction? And I don't want to say no, because there are some really good flash fiction out there, and I would take it if I found it. But in general, this is just from my personal what I like phase, is that you're probably not going to hit all of my in 500 words. I think the shortest story we've published is 2,500 words. I'd have to go back and check, but I think the shortest one was about 2,500 words. Because I just feel most of the flash fiction that gets submitted, I just feel it's an idea, and I'm still waiting for it to be developed. Yes, you can send in flash fiction. Very, very low chance it's going to be accepted. I would suggest that if you have that flash fiction idea, sit down with that idea and see if you can't build it up. See what story is actually there that has caught your attention, and then play with it. See what you can do with it.
David,
Yes.
What about you? Tips and things to avoid.
Tips. I come back to what we were saying earlier, that your first idea might not be your best idea. If it occurs to you right off the bat, chances are it occurred to 350 of the other 700 authors who submitted to us, and so maybe you want to rethink and try something different. And then one of the things I'll say, and this is an editor thing, and it's something that I've taken to very quickly as an editor. Pay attention to how you present your story. When I get a story that's single-spaced with a tiny little font, it's got 2 strikes when I start reading. Even if it turns out to be a great story, I'm already pissed off when I start reading that story because you haven't followed guidelines and you haven't followed professional format.
Do people still do that?
Yes.
Oh my God,
Okay,
yes.
Yeah. I mean,
And
I was
Mm-hmm.
going to say, our guidelines clearly state we want this type of file, we want, standard format, blah, blah, blah. And we still get, PDFs, I've gotten JPEGs. It's just,
yeah.
Oh, I'm so
That's
sorry.
one thing, but I would also say, and this is less a tip for getting in than just a tip to approaching these things. As we've been saying, even the smallest pools of submissions are several hundred. And from the slush pile, most of these anthologies are just taking 6 or 7, maybe 8 stories. If you're rejected by a ZNB anthology, it's not because your story sucks. And it's not a judgment on you as a writer. It's because we had a ton of stories that were really, really good. And maybe yours is too similar to somebody else's and we only wanted one story of a certain type. Or maybe it just didn't grab us in a certain way. But that doesn't mean the story isn't worth something. It doesn't mean somebody else isn't going to grab it at the first chance they get. And so take rejection as a point in a negotiation, not as a final judgment on your story.
That can't be overstated. It can't be overstated.
Yes, I can attest to that as well. But yes, a rejection is not necessarily a judgment on the story. It can be a judgment on the scope of the anthology. Yeah. The anthology could start with a wide group of guidelines, but you get 15 excellent stories that are all sci-fi. You probably don't want a fantasy or a romance sticking out like a sore thumb in that anthology, which doesn't mean it's a bad story. So yes.
There was one story for Submerged that came in early on in the open call, and I absolutely loved it. It was dark. It was very, very dark, but I loved it. And I actually marked it as, we are taking this. And then by the end of the open call, when we had the stories spread out, like, if we put this in the anthology, it is going to stick out. It is going to feel out of place with all of the other stories. And so I finally said, I loved it, but I finally said, we can't take it. It just doesn't fit. So authors have to keep in mind that we aren't necessarily picking individual stories. We are picking stories for a group, for an anthology, and we want that anthology to have a certain feel, and a certain atmosphere to it. And so a lot of times some really, really good stories unfortunately get aside because they just don't mesh well with all of the other stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Compiling an anthology is something of an art, as far as I can tell. From the ones that I've read that I've really enjoyed, you all seem to have a plot. I know it's weird to talk about individual stories that can be from different writers dealing with different subjects in a given theme, but you start strong, you have your your 3 acts flowing through the stories, and then you end strong, and you have a turning point in the middle. And I don't think, you have to look at the anthology as a whole. You can't see it as just an accumulation of good stories. So, and there are advantages to submitting, though. Even if the pool, I can understand why people want to submit, because even if the pool is large, you guys pay pro rates and have very generous contracts that are very careful on the rights. And I think that's important to bring out. So that, just speaking as a writer to all my writer buds out there, that this is something you want to submit to, and give these folks 20,000 applications to read through it, and 20,000 submissions to read through.
I don't want 20,000.
Yeah.
No,
I know I'm being evil. I'm just being
evil. If you have a choice between writing 500 words or writing 20,000 words, if we're going to reject you, we'd much rather reject 500 words because it's just easy.
Yeah. I will give one tip, and I think I'll see if my other editors agree. But I would say send in your story early. When we get a deluge on the last day or the last couple of days as submission closes, and editors are human. And if we have 800 stories to read, but we have 200 stories that came in on the last day, those 200 stories may not get the same care and attention that we might have given them a month before. So I'm going to throw that out. Sam, David, do you feel that sometimes, like, at the end you just get overload at that last bit?
I would hesitantly disagree. I completely agree that we get overloaded at the end. There's no question about that. But I think what that means is that the stories that we can tell early are not quite as good, probably don't get the attention that they would have gotten if they'd come in, say, October. However, I would also say don't. But if it's a good story, it's going to get picked up and looked at no matter what. But the flip side of that is, don't rush to send your story in. I'd say a lot of the stories we get right away, in the first week, are trunk stories that people probably have not looked at carefully enough to see if they fit, or that they've just rushed off because for some reason they think it's going to get, if I'm in first, they're going to like my story better than the others. So I would say, yeah, sending it at the end is not great, but sending it in too early is not great either. If you got a story that's a trunk story, read it, rewrite it, let it sit another week, and then look at it again and see, if it comes in the middle of October rather than the first week of September, that's not going to make a difference.
I think speaking to Patricia's point, if I'm reading in October and I get a story that has kind of a slow beginning, I might be more patient with it than I can afford to be in December when we're inundated. I read every story that we get front to back. I'll read the entire story, but I'm forming a judgment very early on, and I usually have a sense, unless I'm really surprised by a story at the end, either in a good way or a bad way, my initial impression tends to be what carries me through. But in that crush of stories, I'm far more likely to stick to that early judgment than I might be in October or November. Is that kind of what you're getting at, Patricia?
Yeah, I mean, that is what I'm getting at. And, it's not that, we decide in October, if we have 10 great stories in October, we don't stop. We read everything that comes in all the way through. And it, like Josh said in his story, sometimes a story you think in October is a shoo-in when the final, you're down to arguing with your co-editor and you both got knives out and you're stabbing each other saying, I want Sam's story. No, Jean Marie's the last story we're fitting in this anthology. No, let's make it David's. But, but there is that, there is that fatigue. Editors are only human, which is one of the things that I learned as an author, and that's why, things like formatting, being the right type, spell checking so your editor isn't like, oh my God, I've spotted 3 typos and we're still in the first sentence. Those things make a difference. And sometimes towards the end, yeah, that's
yeah, I did a typo in the first line once.
We ignored it.
Yeah, no, you're fine. You're fine. Trust me.
I did a typo on the first line of a query letter once.
Sam, you do. Okay. Basically, I just want to reiterate, though you are looking for new writers and you have published new writers, and sometimes they graduate to anchor authors.
Yep.
Definitely.
So,
I mean,
yeah.
I can't say I don't want to say that we purposely go through the slush pile and say this person's never been published and wrote something good, so we're going to put it in. No, it's always comes down to we want the best stories. So we're not really paying attention to the name or anything like that. We're paying attention to whether or not it's a good story. And it just so happens that, and this is one of the reasons that I insist that we do an open call, is it just so happens that I think in almost every anthology we put out, we've had one person where that is their first professional sales story. And again, it's not because we're searching them out, it just happens that way. And that's why I do the open call, because I know there are good storytellers out there, and hopefully I find them.
Yes. Well, you've had a pretty good track record so far. I'm not going to say that. Okay, I've got a couple questions left. We're coming up on the end, but we do have some time. Unfortunately, we don't have an audience to get questions from. But they might write in when we post this, so be forewarned. But I've always been curious as to how a editor's own reading preferences affect their editorial judgment. So I'm going to ask all of you to name me a few of the writers that really, really have influenced you, or whose writing just is your happy place. You're going to seek them out every time, because that might give folks an idea of your taste when it comes to literature. So, okay, David?
Probably my favorite writer is Guy Gavriel Kay. I'm a huge fan of his fantasy work. And what that means for me as an editor is I look for work that has really good character work, that has moving, powerful prose, that doesn't necessarily have to be the action front, first sentence to last, action, 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 death, 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 lots of blood and lots of stuff going on. If a story is beautifully crafted, I'm going to be drawn to that kind of a story because that's the kind of stuff I like to read.
Okay. Sam?
I'm probably a tough one for this question because in a lot of ways I'm more defined by what I don't like than what I like.
That's valid.
I've occasionally written under the guise of Sam who likes nothing. But for what I like, it's hard to pin down because I love Jane Austen and I love Edgar Rice Burroughs. And you really can't get much farther apart than those two. So it's, I just like good stories. And I put it this way, I like good stories that are fun. I like something that's clever and amusing and interesting and surprises me. I don't like stuff that reminds me of other stuff, even if it's other stuff that I really like.
Okay. You like things to be unique. Okay, Patricia?
I'm going to give a shout out to Gillian Bradshaw, who's one of my favorite authors. And one of the reasons why I love her is that every book of hers is different. The Beacon in Alexandria. I mean, you talk about history from the early Roman Empire. She did Island of Ghosts. She's done science fiction. She's done near future stories. She's done medieval. Every book is different and unique, and she has such a strong voice. She has fabulous characters, and she has a really strong voice. I just, I'm looking over at my bookshelf with, Imperial Purple, The Sand Reckoner, The Bearkeeper's Daughter was also great. She would be on my desert island list, but that's what, if I could grow up to be an author, I want to be her, and that, able to switch between genres almost effortlessly. She's a master at that.
Cool. And you, Joshua?
David stole one of mine. I was going to say that would be okay. But I did have two others. I really love Tad Williams, his fantasy novels, especially Memory Sorn. I love that series. And just to get a different genre out there, especially because we've got Derelict and coming this year, Stephen King. I do like Stephen King a lot. So I think what is going to capture my attention is story, though, and what I love about these writers is that it's about character. Yes, it's great to have an idea, but if you don't have a character that I'm interested in, that I'm engaged in, then the cool idea is already out the window because I'm not going to care. So focus. My suggestion is focus on character.
Okay. All right. Any final thoughts?
I would say for the, I realize one thing we didn't talk about for When Worlds Collide is exactly what we mean by that. And there's the obvious, when worlds collide, when contact between two civilizations, which I think we'll probably get many, many stories of, first contact stories. But it also might be something as odd as, a story about, a fast food joint versus a sit-down, fancy French restaurant with, how they collide if you could find some fantasy or science fiction hook to it. So, as David has said, as Joshua has said, don't go with your first idea. Try to think a little deeper into the idea.
Okay. Now, before we oh dear, I seem to be reverbing now. Before we leave our folks and each other, I'd like you all to let our audience know where they can find your writing for the future so that they can read you and enjoy you and say thank you for editing them and throwing money at them. So, David?
You can find me online at davidbco.com. And there are links there to the DB Jackson website as well, so you can find all my work that way. And actually, I want to say, speaking of, publishing a first work by an author, the very first DB Jackson Thief Taker story was not a Thief Taker novel. It was the short story that appeared in After Hours. So that was DB Jackson's world debut.
After Hours at the Herb Bar, yes.
That's right. That's right. So you can find me there. I just had a new book come out under the D.B. Jackson pseudonym. It's called Time's Assassin. It's the third book in a time travel epic fantasy series. And I have a new Thief Taker project coming out hopefully later this year, a set of novellas.
Okay. Sam?
Right now, I'm out of luck. You're out of luck. I'm out of luck because I just bought but I just got the rights back for my fantasy trilogy, The Stoneways, from Tor in the spring, and I have not yet got the either a website or the ebook editions that I'm putting out. I don't have either of these up yet. Things got a little jumbled when everything else went haywire. I'm hoping to have them up soon. Right now, the way to find my stuff, because I will be posting things there once I get this going, is my Facebook page, which is under SC Butler. Okay. So that's probably the way to prepare yourself to get something that will come out probably in about 3 months.
Okay, so find you on Facebook. Patricia?
Yeah, you can find me patriciabray.com. You can find me on Amazon. You can find one of my favorite short stories is in the Where book, which you can see over my shoulders with Zombies Need Brains. Yes, with the, in my little Where Goat mascot, as it were. So.
Yes, and on the cover too.
It is the ultimate. I mean, that face on the cover. So that was one of the best, one of the funnest covers that we've had.
Yes.
Although the robot one was good too.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of good covers there. Aria Studios has done good. Okay, Joshua, where can folks find you?
Everybody ready? Okay, web pages. Okay, my personal stuff. Okay, so if you want any of my epic fantasy novels, I am at joshuapalmatier.com. Okay, you can find me on Facebook at Joshua B. Palmatier. And on Twitter, it's Ben Tate Author, which is a whole other story in and of itself. So on Twitter, at Ben Tate Author. Okay, for the zombies stuff, we have a website at zombiesneedbrains.com. At Twitter, it's at ZNBLLC. So ZNBLLC. And you can find Zombies on Facebook as well at Zombies Need Brains. Just look that up. Okay, and we also have a Patreon. So if you'd like to support us outside of the Kickstarter and get like some behind-the-scenes info about Zombies Need Brains or about myself, Joshua Palmatier, you can check out the Patreon. You can search either Joshua Palmatier or Zombies Need Brains on Patreon. So the advantage of the Patreon backers or the Patreon patrons is that you get a little bit of a notice on like the themes, and you get to see the covers a little bit ahead of time and things like that. So, so some slight advantages if you're a patron there. And of course, you can keep track of all of my stuff and Zombies stuff as it happens. So.
And we will try to post a link to the Kickstarter later in this video, and certainly underneath the video in the text. So thank you all for joining us here today, and best of luck on the Kickstarter. I'm looking forward to reading all the books, and hopefully I will write something that will stand up to the other folks in the slush pile. Y'all take care, and thank you in the audience for watching and for joining us at Continual, the never-ending convention.
Thank you for allowing us to steal some time.
Great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Great.